He had never been off his feet. 61 international fights, 61 victories, 11 years for continents. And through all of it, no referee, no opponent, and no camera had ever seen him lose his balance. Not once. His name was Carl Vandermeer. The instructors at the Kodokan, the mother temple of judo, gave him a second name. He was a young American sergeant on his first deployment to Tokyo, and their best black belts spent 2 hours taking turns trying to bring him to the ground. When it was over, the master of the hall bowed to him and named him something that translates loosely as the Pillar. It wasn't a compliment, it was a measurement. Tokyo, 1964, the Olympic semifinals. On the mat stood a Soviet heavyweight, 193 m tall, 18 kilograms heavier, a neck that filled his collar, and the reigning European champion. He had defeated every man in his path to the semifinals. The fight that made Vandermeer's name known to the world lasted 8 seconds. One grip, one turn, and the giant man flew through a wall of flashbulbs into the timekeeper's table. The scoreboard hadn't even finished writing Vandermeer's name. After that night, referees stood one step closer during his fights because they knew how fast it would end. Every art has a law it teaches on day one. Judo's law. Everything hits the ground eventually. Every judoka of his era discovered there was an exception, and that exception was Carl Vandermeer. This is the story of a summer night in 1967, when the Pillar flew to Long Beach, California, and sat in the third row of a martial arts tournament to watch a man launch a volunteer half a foot taller out of a folding chair with a punch that traveled only 1 inch. 4,000 people stood up and applauded a miracle. One judoka stood up to call it a lie. What happened in the next 4 minutes was never filmed. 9 photographs survived. One shows a buckling knee that had never buckled in 11 years. One shows a smile with blood on it. The last one shows an open hand. It is the story of how the Pillar was brought to the ground for the first time in his life by a man named Bruce Lee. People ask what I remember. I remember him passing by my stand. I didn't see his face. I felt a strange scent in the air. Just as I felt his presence, he was gone. To understand the man in the third row, you have to go back 25 years to a city burned off the map. Carl Vandermeer was born in 1933 in Rotterdam under the harbor cranes. He was 6 years old when the bombers came and the city center vanished in an afternoon. He grew up in the rubble economy of the docks, a tall, silent boy hauling crates for bread money, watching dockworkers wrestle swinging cargo twice their weight, learning the first law of his life before long division. Everything hits the ground eventually. At 13, he sailed to America. Mid-Atlantic, a storm hit the ship. The crew told the story once. While grown men strapped themselves into their bunks, the boy stood outside on the swaying deck, knees soft, hands relaxed, moving with the motion. A sailor yelled at him to get below. The boy stayed where he was. He wasn't brave, he was hungry to learn. The United States Air Force found him in 1953. He took up judo 6 years later, because that was the era when the general commanding America's bombers decided his crew should know how to fall, and the Air Force began flying planes full of sergeants to Tokyo to the Kodokan. Most returned home with sore hips and a good story. Carl Vandermeer came home with a name. During his first stay, the Kodokan instructors lined up their young black belts for randori practice matches. The big Americans stood in the center of the room for 2 hours, while the best of them tried to bring him down. When it ended, the senior instructor on the mat bowed and gave him a name that translates as the Pillar. The name was not praise. It was a reminder of that day, of how he stood without flinching. At Travis Air Force Base, they still talk about the hangar. A strip of mats rolled over concrete, a line of airmen in flight suits, and Vandermeer working through them like a machine set to a metronome. Grip, turn, throw. Next man, 1 throw per breath. Men at the front fell while those at the back counted heads, calculating how much time they had left. In the Air Force, they teach you one thing above all. No one beats the ground. Carl Vandermeer believed it. He treated concrete like a partner, and every man he met like a guest arriving there. Tokyo, 1964. The Olympics come to judo's birthplace, and the Americans arrive with a 31-year-old team captain who does not smile for photos. In the semifinals, he faced the Soviet heavyweight, 193 m tall, forearms like mooring lines, a man who had folded every opponent in his path. The fight lasted 8 seconds. The grip locked, the world tilted, and the big man went down like a door unhinged. A full rotation through a wall of flashbulbs before crashing into the officials' table. The scoreboard hadn't even finished typing Vandermeer's name. Then began the streak. Chicago, Frankfurt, Osaka, Sao Paulo. 61 international matches over 11 years, 61 victories. Referees stood a step closer, not expecting trouble, but knowing how quickly it ended. In Frankfurt in 1965, a German heavyweight spent 6 months studying film to prepare. He told reporters he found a gap in the American's grip. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Afterward, the German sat in the tunnel staring at his hands, trying to understand what went wrong, certain he had prepared a counter for every move. It was a fight so fast it made him question his entire career. Judo has a word for the exact moment a man begins to fall. Kazushi, the moment balance breaks. Before the throw, before the grip, there is that split second when a man's weight leaves him. Whoever holds the Kazushi controls the other. Many judoka spend their lives searching for it. Few ever find it. Opponents tried everything on Carl Vandermeer. Strength, speed, fury. They even tried breaking the rules to put him on the mat. 61 of the strongest men on the planet. None ever found his Kazushi. The man who finally did was standing on a stage in Long Beach holding a microphone. All evening, the judo guys at my booth kept repeating a number. 61, 61. In my business, you respect a number like that. In the spring of 1967, a young lieutenant at Travis walked into the base gym holding a rolled-up magazine. A young American martial artist, 90 minutes down the coast in Los Angeles, was doing things at tournaments that grown men claimed were impossible. Weeks later, someone brought a 16mm film taken from the stands, grainy as gravel. A man places his fist 1 inch from a large man's chest. The large man flies backward into a chair. They ran it 3 times in the day room. The lieutenant kept glancing at the captain, waiting for a verdict. Carl Vandermeer watched with crossed arms, and as the end of the film slapped against the reel, he said exactly one word. Chair. Because look where the volunteer lands. There is always a chair. A man pushed will stumble. A man placed will fall into furniture. To Vandermeer, it wasn't a demonstration, it was a production. Balance was his life's work, his science. And 90 minutes down the coast, 4,000 people were applauding what he was certain was a magic trick. You must understand what those 1967 tournaments were. Martial arts in America were not a unified world. They were a dozen small nations in a permanent Cold War. Karate guys called boxers brawlers. Boxers called karate dancing. Judo guys watched it all with folded arms. Every school had its own building, its own lineage, its own answer. Certainty is easy when nothing crosses the line to challenge it. Into this Cold War walked Bruce Lee. He said, smiling on television. Most of what they teach was wasted motion. Half the country knew him as a pioneer. The other half knew the tournament rumors. That summer, the International Karate Championships came to Long Beach. Vandermeer bought his own ticket. He asked one man to come along. The sergeant who had been his training partner and cornerman since 1959. The arena held 4,000 people and the heat of every single one of them. Press row in the front, flashbulbs firing, karate practitioners from 11 countries. And in the third row, in a gray suit, hands folded in his lap, sat a man who had come to see just one thing. Late in the evening, he got it. The demonstration you've already seen. The folding chair, the volunteer, a heavyweight half a foot taller, braced and ready. The fist hovering 1 inch away, the crowd counting down unprompted. The fist traveled that inch in a fraction of a second, connecting. The impact launched him briefly into the air to land in the chair. And that is where the famous reel ends. The newsreel cameraman lowered his camera because the scheduled part of the evening was over. The applause swelled until a voice cut through it. Applause is money in my trade. A full house clapping means lines at the booth. Then a voice went through it like a nail through a paper cup. I've seen hecklers, drunks, loudmouths. This wasn't that. He wasn't playing. He stood there like a man waiting for change he was owed. He didn't shout. That's the detail every survivor agrees on first. He stood up in the third row and spoke just like you speak at a card table, and somehow 4,000 people heard every word. Sit him down. Try it on a man who isn't paid to fall. The applause faltered, confused, dying out in sections like stadium lights shut off row by row. And then he turned, not to the stage, but to the audience, as if the man on stage were a prop he had finished addressing. These days, the show teaches falling better than hitting. 4,000 heads snapped back to the stage. The announcer made a strange little sound into the mic. Press row erupted like a kicked hornet's nest. Flashbulbs pivoted to the third row. In the dark, half the arena whispered to the other half who that was. Words like Olympic captain and Air Force drifted through the air. The whispers built Vandermeer's introduction for him. And Bruce Lee on stage, holding the most powerful, precise hands anyone in that building had seen. A man just called a paid performer before 4,000 people, smiled. He reached for the microphone. He looked down at the man in the third row for a long, friendly moment. And into the silence, as pleasant as a dinner host, he said, "Every magician needs a volunteer. May I borrow you?" The walk from the third row to the stage stairs took 11 steps. The arena was silent for all 11. Vandermeer came up the steps like a man boarding a plane, unhurried, certain. What he did first became one of the most debated details of the night. He walked right past Bruce Lee. He took the folding chair, the famous chair, and moved it with one hand to the edge of the stage. No chair. He rolled his sleeves to his elbows slowly, like a man preparing for a shift at the docks. He stood in the center of the stage and said clearly, "Move me. One step, one shoe. Use both hands. Take a running start if you want. Do that, and I will bow to you on this stage." A pause. Fail, and you take this microphone and tell them what this is. That was the whole bet. No money, no belt, no trophy. The words of two men before 4,000 witnesses. If Bruce Lee could move him, an Olympic captain would publicly bow to a martial artist. If he couldn't, the fastest rising name in martial arts would stand on a stage in his own backyard, hold a microphone, and confess to a fraud. Consider the stakes for Bruce Lee in 1967. All he had was the reputation 4,000 people wanted to believe in. Bruce Lee adjusted his suit. He was still smiling, but people in the front row later said the smile changed. No longer a showman's smile, but something far more dangerous. My line emptied out. A guy walked away mid-order, leaving 35 cents on my counter. I watched from the tunnel entrance. The man spoke to the audience like he owned the show. The first push was almost polite, a flat palm against the chest. Vandermeer's eyes didn't move. His feet didn't move. Nothing moved. The second push was different. Bruce Lee drove his feet into the floor, lowered his hips, and shoved forward with his entire body. He went straight into the 105 kilograms of the judo Olympian. For a full second, the air hung heavy. They were locked together, legs trembling, seams straining, as 4,000 people stood up almost without realizing it. Then they saw movement. The sole of Bruce Lee's shoe slipped back half an inch. The tiny squeak carried to the back row. Vandermeer looked down at him the way a bridge looks at weather, and someone laughed, a man somewhere in the dark, then his section, then the floor, then everyone. 4,000 people laughed at Bruce Lee. Flashbulbs flashed again, but they felt different now. The announcer walked across the stage, hand near the mic, wearing a look that said a career had just ended. 11 years of balance had just publicly beaten the sharpest martial artist twice. The confession was one sentence away. Down in press row, a photographer rewound his film and checked the counter. 9 frames left on the roll, but he sensed something strange in how the man was standing. Bruce Lee reached the microphone first. He picked it up and waited quietly while 4,000 people laughed at him, waiting until the laughter settled. He's right. Another wave of laughter erupted. They didn't expect him to admit defeat. Pushing doesn't work. That's why in the history of fighting, no one has ever won by pushing. The silence became absolute. You could hear the air conditioning. May I show you what works? What happened next took 9 seconds. The photographer got his camera up just in time. Vandermeer was generous now, a teacher who had made his point to an audience that had just laughed with him. He reached forward casually to grab Bruce Lee's wrist, the grip that had ended 61 fights, and said his final 4 words. "First lesson, Mr. Lee. Frame 1. The sweep comes, the same foot sweep that had folded Olympic heavyweights quickly and cleanly. But Bruce Lee isn't there. He leaps over it lightly, like stepping over a curb. But Vandermeer flows from sweep to palm strike, short and heavy. The palm hits the center of Lee's chest. Bruce Lee stumbles back 2 full steps, arms flying up, as 4,000 people gasp together. Real contact. For the first time all night, the man has been hit. Frame 3. The counter comes back at a height no one expected. Low, a side kick into the flesh of Vandermeer's thigh, right on the nerve line above the knee. The 11-year legend dips 1 inch, 1 knee. The judoka's face doesn't change, but sharp eyes saw the truth. Frame 5, Vandermeer's forearm, short, brutal, a bar of iron through the dark. Bruce Lee takes it on the shoulder and rolls with it, but the tip catches his mouth. Frame 6. Years later, a magazine printed this photo. They called it a cinematic shot. Bruce Lee wiping blood from his lip. With his thumb and smiling, an honest smile. Bruce Lee always respected and enjoyed the presence of another true martial artist. Frames 7 and 8, the final lunge. Vandermeer reaches for the lapel as he always does, but finds nothing. His hand closes on empty air. Bruce Lee's elbow comes down from above, chopping the grip away. Then he slips to the side, and just like that, he is 2 meters away. Hands low. Waiting. 9 seconds. 2 men, 2 meters apart, for 1,000 people not breathing. Confusion washes over Carl Vandermeer's face. His eyes narrow, his breathing shallow. He was still trying to figure out how. The photographer held his last frame. Then Bruce Lee raised a finger. Slowly, so the whole arena could follow, he turned the finger sideways, 1 inch. No chair, no volunteer. Stand like you stood in Tokyo. The press stopped shooting. All night flashbulbs had gone off in volleys, now not one. In 20 years, I never saw press row go dark before it was over. Carl Vandermeer set his feet. Understand what that meant. The finest competitive base of his generation. Knees soft, hips set. Weight sank into the floor as if a concrete wall had grown around him. For 11 years, 61 of the strongest men on earth had tried pulling, sweeping, throwing everything to break his balance. None succeeded. Now stood number 62. Or so he thought. He set himself like a man closing a bank vault. Bruce Lee placed his knuckles 1 inch from Vandermeer's sternum and waited. 6 full seconds. 4,000 people focused entirely on that 1 inch gap. The photographer later said he didn't dare snap his shutter because it would sound like an alarm clock in that silence. On the edge of the stage sat the folding chair, ignored. 1 inch, the width of 2 fingers. That tiny space held everything the man in the third row had called a lie. The fist moved. There was no wind-up. There wasn't room for one. Instead, everything Bruce Lee had built crossed that 1 inch of air at once. Floor, ankle, hip, spine, shoulder, wrist, all snapped together like a whip. Carl Vandermeer's heel lifted and spent a long moment in the air. When his foot finally landed, he took 2 steps backward he never intended to take. The first backward steps of his professional career. Then the Olympic judo captain fell exactly as the volunteer had fallen. The same angle, the same helpless twist, the same crash 4,000 people had laughed at an hour earlier thinking it was acting. Only this time there was no chair. Only thin air between him and the floor. In the front row, a karate master who spent 20 years telling students judo fighters were just peasants shot out of his seat, hands over his mouth. Press row, final frame. It captures everything. An Olympic captain flat on the stage boards of Long Beach, and above him, already extended, an open hand. Judo has a word for the exact moment a man begins to fall. 61 opponents spent 11 years chasing Carl Vandermeer's Kazushi, and Bruce Lee found it 1 inch from his chest. Vandermeer stared at the hand for a long moment. Then he took it. The arena didn't cheer. 4,000 people sat in silence. Some later said they silently thanked God for what they witnessed, a defeat, a demonstration, or the end of an argument. Carl Vandermeer stood up. He walked to the edge of the stage, picked up his jacket from the chair, put it on, and straightened it. And then, before 4,000 witnesses, the man who thought it was a trick bowed deeply and slowly. Without hesitation, he had lost, and he knew it. Then the arena erupted, not for the punch, but for the bow. Standing ovation for 2 men. I've seen people leave this building 1,000 times. Winners walk out loud, losers quiet. That night, they left like coming out of church. The 35 cents stayed on my counter. Never picked them up. Kept them in a jar. Only tip I ever got for selling nothing. I don't know judo or kung fu, but I know how to read a room. That arena went in believing one thing, and came out believing another. Vandermeer flew home the next morning. He never filed a report or gave interviews about that night. In 20 more years in the sport, his students noted he never used the word staged again. But at Travis AFB in 1968, a new section was added to the close combat curriculum. Close-range power, structure over distance. The folder had an unofficial label typed by a sergeant, the Lee problem. He retired from competition in 1972, record intact. 61 wins, 1 loss, unrecorded by any official federation. Only 9 photos and the memories of 4,000 people prove it happened. He taught at Travis until 1981 and passed away in his sleep in 2001. Bruce Lee rarely spoke of that night, except once years later when asked about hecklers. I did a demo in 1967. For 1,000 people. A man called it a trick. It taught me how fast the eye deceives the mind. The crowd believed me 1 second, him the next. Very few see through what they look at. Believing is fast. Truth is slow, moving at the speed of touch. Only one man that night was slow enough to see the truth. I still remember him. The 9 photographs were never published together. They remain in a paper envelope in a metal cabinet at a Northern California Veterans Hall. The famous reel still ends where it always ended. A volunteer on a chair, applause like a wave. The film ended 4 minutes too early, that's all. As for the war between styles,